Welcome to the March webinar, My App Goes to Washington. Thank you to Head Genealogist Darren Licklider for helping us map out this tour of the application process. How does the work you do in preparing an application affect its success in being approved once the application arrives at DAR headquarters? It may seem like there are many hurdles to verification, but providing you with an understanding of the process from start to finish will help each applicant soar over those hurdles. After viewing today's webinar, you will be familiar with the path an application takes after it arrives at headquarters, understand the different sections within the Office of the Registrar General and the role they each play, and be aware of common errors on applications that cause problems with the approval process. The Office of the Registrar General is the largest department at DAR headquarters, with some 40 staff members. We are divided into sections that are located on 3 different floors. In order to manage this large department, we have 3 assistant directors who are assigned to one of 3 sections of the department. Linda Carter, currently assigned to data entry, Forrest Crosley, currently assigned to applications, and Stacy Newton, currently assigned to supplementals. We also have a team of corrections genealogists who oversee the corrections process as well as review applications. Other staff members perform a variety of tasks such as payroll, mailing letters, answering emails, and directing phone calls. This slide will illustrate the various steps in the verification process of your application. First, your application paperwork arrives in the DAR mailroom. Second, after the mail is delivered to the Registrar General's Department, it is opened and sorted by data entry staff. Third, your application is now in the pre-verification process. The data entry team enters the application information into the computer database. The data entry team now checks signatures and processes payment. The application is now scanned and forwarded to the genealogy department for them to verify the lineage and service you submitted. Then the genealogists examine and evaluate the submitted paperwork. If additional documentation is needed, the genealogist will write a letter. Otherwise, the paper is pending final verification and returned to data entry. Data entry completes the processing by assigning a national number and add volume. Finally, new member packets are prepared and mailed after the National Board of Management. Let's take a closer look at this process. First, DAR receives a lot of mail. The mail is not delivered from the U.S. Postal Service. The mailroom staff goes to the post office and collects the mail on a daily basis. This is part of the agreement with the Postal Service, which affords DAR better postage rates. The mailroom staff then sorts the mail by department and delivers it to each department. In 2012, the Registrar General's Office received over 20,000 applications and supplementals, as well as more than 1,000 requests for supplemental certificates, and other mail such as responses to have-writtens. Once the mail has been delivered to the Registrar General's Department, applications and supplementals are placed in file folders with the checks and supporting documentation. The application lifecycle begins with the data entry team. We call this the pre-verification process. Once applications are in their folders, member profiles for new applicants are created in the membership database, which is known as IMIS. Once the applications are logged in IMIS, the checks are batched and prepared for deposit. The data entry team looks at the checks with 2 questions in mind. 1, is this the right amount? The right amounts being 105 for regular applications, 120 for member at large, and 30 for CAR members in good standing. And 2, is it a chapter check? Personal checks are acceptable for supplementals, but not applications. Next, they check the signatures. Applicants must sign their own applications, and the signature must be either notarized or attested to by a current officer of the chapter. All applications must be signed by the regent and registrar. If either is not available to sign, the first vice regent, treasurer, or recording secretary may sign in their absence. All applications must be endorsed by 2 members in good standing of the same chapter. If joining at large, the endorsers must be from the same state. Then the data entry team sees if the signatures are original. Photocopied signatures are not acceptable. The application is checked for completeness. The data entry team checks to ensure that it has been properly printed and in the right format. Has the application been printed on legal size paper? Is it in legal size format? Is the paper acid-free and 25% rag content? The application is checked to ensure that it has been completed properly. The data entry team looks to see, are all generations listed on page 2? Are there blanks on page 2? If the application is not complete, it will not be sent to genealogy. Registrars and applicants should understand that if an application is completed using Build-An-App, and if using an old application on which no places were listed, more research will be needed to fill in those blanks. Does page 3 have sources listed? And is the service and residence section completed on page 4? If any problems are identified with the application at this point, a pre-verification letter will be sent to the chapter registrar explaining what needs to be done to correct the problem. Pre-verification letters are completely avoidable. So prior to submitting, review the application for the following: payment method and payment amount, format and paper type, signatures, and completeness. Additional details are available in the publications, application papers, instructions for their preparation, is that lineage right, and is that service right. Anyone who helps with preparing and submitting applications and supplementals should download these free publications from the DAR Members Only website. It is also a good idea to share these publications with your prospective applicants so they know the requirements. The application, check, and supporting documentation are scanned into OnBase. The name, receive date, chapter, chapter code, date of birth, and date received are imported into OnBase from IMIS database. We'll explain more about OnBase in a few minutes. Now, the application is forwarded to genealogy. Once it has successfully moved through the data entry section, your application is transferred to the genealogy section, where OnBase assigns the application to a genealogist based on a certain category. These categories include established patriot and child, different child, new ancestor, coded papers, and Spanish and French ancestor. Once verified, it is then checked by another genealogist in order to ensure that all procedures have been followed. Finally, it is returned to data entry for post-verification processing. Current turnaround time for application is about 8 weeks, and current turnaround time for supplementals is about 8 months. Let's now talk about OnBase. OnBase is a software program used at headquarters. All applications and supporting documentation are scanned into OnBase. Through OnBase, we store and retrieve digital images. OnBase also is an electronic workflow. The digital images are moved through various queues depending on the next task that needs to be performed. This allows us to efficiently manage and track applications throughout the verification process. The program is much more detailed than this brief explanation, but hopefully this will give you some idea of what we're talking about when we mention OnBase. As applications and supplementals move through OnBase, the received date determines which papers will be reviewed first in the genealogy section. The received date is the date that the application or supplemental was processed in data entry. It is not the date that it was received in the mailroom. There is a lag of a couple days depending on the volume of mail. OnBase, which was imported from IMIS by data entry, sorts the application papers by the received date, and they are made available to the genealogist in the order in which they are received. Some applications are given priority. These exceptions to the rule are priority for prospective members of advanced age or experiencing terminal illness, priority for applicants of organizing chapters. If applications on the same ancestor are received at different times, as soon as the genealogist obtains the first paper on the ancestor, OnBase will automatically assign the other papers to the same genealogist, and they will be reviewed together. For supplementals, the same exceptions do not apply. If there are supplementals on the same ancestor, they will be reviewed together if they are arrived within 2 weeks of one another. Some other questions the genealogists ask themselves. How much of the lineage has been previously verified? Have papers on the same lineage been verified more recently? Information on more recently approved papers will take priority over information on older papers, unless proven to be incorrect. Is new information supported by documentation with the current paper? If information is added to the application that has not been previously accepted on a DAR application, supporting documentation must be submitted in order to verify it. And are sources properly cited on page 3? Notice that in this example, page 2 is taken from an old application. The genealogist will not review this paper because of the blanks. The genealogist will write a letter telling the applicant they need to provide more information. Continuing with the same example, the old application used to populate this form does not meet current standards. Applications like this will result in a letter. The genealogist will not fill in these blanks for you. The registrar and applicant should consider the following. You do not need to repeat the information from page 1. Instead, just list your sources. References to census must include enough information to identify which census in the enumeration district, where applicable, and the page number. In this example, the citation is incomplete. If the genealogist needs to use the census, he or she would have to look up the information and write it on page 3. This takes time away from the verification process and leads to more delays. In this generation, there are no sources cited for the spouse. DAR requires documentation for each parent, not just those through whom the lineage goes. Finally, the Patriot Index is out of date, and it should not be cited as a source for lineage. Instead, you should cite the most recent national number for the ancestor's generation. Now let's discuss the process for verifying service. When reviewing the service for an ancestor, the genealogist will ask the following questions. Has the service already been verified? Is the line closed for service? FAMPCS means future applicants must prove correct service. Is there a source listed in the source for service field in the GRS entry for the ancestor? If the service has not been verified, then what has the applicant cited? National numbers, the Patriot Index, and the ancestor number are not sources for service and should not be listed as such. And does the service claim conflict with service credited to other ancestors? This is the most common reason for closing a line. Following verification by the genealogy section, the application paper is returned to the data entry section. Here, data entry completes the application process by assigning a national number to the prospective member. The application will be formally approved at the next National Board of Management meeting, which usually occurs in February, April, one preceding and one following Continental Congress, October, and December. Check the calendar on the members-only website for specific dates. After each National Board of Management meeting, the data entry section prepares and mails new member packets, which include the certificate and the new member brochure. The numbers of applications and supplementals received and verified has increased significantly in the last few years. As you can see from these statistics, in 2005 we received 7,475 applications and verified 7,185. By contrast, in 2012 we received 14,015 applications and verified 13,318. This is almost double. Supplementals have almost tripled in the same amount of time. In 2005, the average turnaround time for verification was between 3 and 4 weeks. Now it is about 8 weeks, which is an increase of almost an entire month. The gap has increased as the number of applications received has increased. The increase in applications received has had a direct impact on the verification process. We have added several genealogist positions in the last few years to assist in processing the increasing workload. We have also launched the online courses. The previous courses took up considerably more staff time. With the online classes, fewer staff members are needed to manage the courses, which has freed up more staff to work on papers. Verification procedures are continually under scrutiny in order to make them as efficient as possible. Many procedures are now automated, which reduces the amount of labor needed by avoiding duplication. How does this affect you? Staff genealogists no longer have time to do extensive research to verify applications and supplementals. If the documentation needed to verify a paper has not been submitted or does not meet current standards, the genealogist will send the applicant a letter that more documentation is needed. In order to avoid a have-written letter, make sure all documentation is included with the paper upon submission. This includes GRC reports, online supporting documentation and library files, and use the most recent papers as much as possible. They are usually more complete than older papers. If information from the most recent application is incorporated into the new paper, this will save the genealogist a lot of time. And remember, you do not need to send record copies. Let's take some time before we end this webinar today to look at how you can avoid the have-writtens. First, what are have-writtens? The term have-written is DAR office speak that has stood the test of time. It comes from, we have written a letter. In most cases, the genealogists need a little more information to verify an application or a supplemental. Now, we all know that you don't like have-writtens. The genealogists don't like writing them any more than you like receiving them. Hopefully, the tips on the next few slides will help minimize the number of letters the staff need to write. It is not a secret that the internet has revolutionized genealogical research. We believe this is one of the reasons for the increase in DAR membership. It is much easier to do genealogy thanks to Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, and a host of other sites. At the same time, care must be used when using online sources. Indexes to vital records can be misleading. Just because the name is the same doesn't mean the entry is for the correct person. There are numerous examples where the index was submitted, but the image of the original record was also available online, only to discover that the record was for the wrong person. Indexes should lead you to the original record. A heavy reliance on online indexes may result in a have-written letter requesting copies of the originals. Beware of user-submitted information. This information is only as good as the sources the submitter used. Find a grave memorials are an excellent example. Users can link memorials of relatives to another. This is not proof of lineage. For Find a Grave, we do accept the information found on photos of the tombstones. And these sources are never acceptable for DAR applications. Online family trees and pedigree charts, family data collections, U.S. and international marriage records, International Genealogical Index. For more information on how to evaluate online sources for acceptability, watch the video presentation, Online Sources, which was given at the Registrar General's Forum at Congress 2012. How else can you avoid a have written? Make sure your applicants are aware of the requirements. Downloadable copies of application papers, instructions for their preparation, and Is That Lineage Right are available for free. Share these with your applicants. Have the applicants proofread their applications, especially 1 and 2. They may be able to identify mistakes in the information that would otherwise result in a have written. Do the dates make sense? How old were the parents in each generation when they were married? How old were the parents when the child was said to have been born? Were the parents alive when the child was born? Do the math. And do the places make sense? Is the place of birth of each child consistent with the residence of his parents at that time? If the parents were born, married, and died in Maine, but the child was born in Georgia, you could have a problem. Is there more than one person of the same name and age in the area? How can you distinguish between the two? Do you have the correct child with his or her parents? This is especially important because families often use the same names from one generation to the next, so it is not uncommon to find cousins with the same name who are close in age. It is usually not enough to rely on census records to sort them out. Here are the top 10 reasons have-writtens are sent. 1. Incomplete documentation, especially for the first 3 generations. 2. Use of user-submitted sources for lineage. 3. Use of vital records index when the original record is needed. 4. Proof of maiden name when the line goes through the female. 5. Applicant's birth certificate does not name her parents. 6. Child born before parents' marriage. 7. Proof of residence or service of ancestor. 8. Proof of link for a different child. 9. Documentation cited on page 3 but not submitted. And the 10th reason have-writtens are sent is the use of pre-1850 census records as the source for a link between generations. Have-writtens can also be avoided if you double-check specifics on adoption, marriages, merged people, dates in place, and family genealogies. For example, with adoptions, were the parents married after the child was born? This is becoming more common. Sometimes it is suggestive that one of the parents may have been a step-parent who adopted the child. Unfortunately, step-parents' adoptive parents cannot be listed on page 2 of the application. The lineage must reflect the true bloodline. If both parents are adoptive parents, the applicant will have to pursue membership on her biological parents' ancestry. There has been a lot of confusion over the years about marriages. Proof that a child was born of a legitimate marriage is not required. If a marriage did take place, every effort should be made to document it. This is especially true if the line goes through a female. Proof of her name change is required. If Mary Smith is living with her parents in 1850, and then you have a Mary Johnson in 1860, how do you know that they are the same person? It is extremely rare that census records alone will prove this. This marriage record would likely be the best way to prove this. Marriage records are widely available online for many states through Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, and the U.S. Gen Web Project. Beware of merged people. The term merged people refers to taking two records of unrelated people and combining them. For example, you may have a birth record for John Smith in Newbury, Massachusetts, and a death record for John Smith in Springfield, Massachusetts. How do you know they are the same person? Middle names were uncommon until the 19th century. They were usually limited to surnames, such as a son being named for a maternal grandfather, like John Archer Smith. If a first and middle name are listed on the application, the genealogists need to have documentation that conclusively proves the person had both names. We cannot assume that records for John Smith and Aaron Smith are for a person named John Aaron Smith. Dates and places. Make sure that when dates and places are given on page 2, that they are supported by documentation. Use DAR national numbers for as much information as you can. Provide documentation for each person in each generation, not just those in the direct bloodline. Census records do not prove complete dates or places. Use original records as much as possible. And the list of Patriots' children on page 3 and 4 of a previously verified paper does not constitute proof of new children. Most family genealogies are not acceptable. Just because a genealogy was used on one paper does not mean it will be accepted on another. It all depends on what records the genealogy cites for the subjects in question. If used, it shouldn't be used for more than 1 or 2 generations. And it should not be used when vital records, obituaries, or better records exist. Finally, please review the guidelines on the members-only website. Today, we have traveled the path an application takes after it arrives at headquarters. We have discussed the different sections within the Registrar General's office and the role they each play. And we have identified some common errors on applications that cause problems with the approval process and suggested ways to avoid the dreaded have-writtens. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. We hope you have learned more about the DAR application verification process. If you have any questions about the application process, please contact the staff at genealogy@dar.org.